The Florida sun beat down on the Orlando asphalt, making the air shimmer like a mirage, but inside the Shaq Shack, Shaquille O'Neal's beloved gastropub, the atmosphere was an oasis of coolness and welcome. The pub, an eclectic mix of southern charm, London pub touches, and a dash of sportsmanship, was Shaq's personal sanctuary. Every brick, every beer mug, and every menu detail reflected his heart and soul, an investment that went far beyond the financial. That Saturday, Shaq's day off was as rare as a solar eclipse. He'd spent the morning at the gym, lifting weights with the same ferocity he displayed on the court, but the call of his kitchen was an irresistible melody. He loved the smoky aroma of the slow-roasted ribs, the clatter of copper pans, and the symphony of satisfied customers, each bite a small victory. Determined to pay a surprise visit, he prepared for a discreet incursion into his own kingdom. He donned a faded black t-shirt, a Lakers baseball cap that had seen better days, and dark sunglasses that hid the mischievous glint in his eyes. He wanted to be a ghost in the crowd, just observing, exchanging a few words with patrons, and maybe, just maybe, snagging an extra portion of his famous bread pudding. He parked his imposing black SUV a few blocks away, like a giant hiding among dwarves, and walked to the entrance, his footsteps echoing like muffled thunder. At the door, like a stone sentinel, stood Kevin, a security guard freshly arrived from England, with a look as determined as a guard from the Tower of London. Kevin, a young man in his early 20s with the ambition of a lion and the rigidity of a rule master, was eager to prove his worth. He had a reputation for following protocol to the letter, and nobody entered the Shaq Shack without passing his scrutiny. Shaq approached, ready to slip inside, but Kevin, with a vision like a rule radar, raised his hand, halting the giant's advance. "Sorry, mate, but we have a dress code here. Can't allow chaps in with caps and shades," Kevin said, his voice firm but with a slight London accent that sounded like a familiar tune amidst the street's hubbub. Shaq, who had conquered the NBA, television, and the business world, was momentarily perplexed. He'd never heard of such a draconian policy, especially in his own territory, which he had always imagined as a safe haven for everyone. "Come on, mate, I'm just popping in for a bite to eat," Shaq replied, his voice deep like distant thunder, trying not to let his irritation get the better of him. "Can't be helped, governor, rules are rules," Kevin responded, impassive, as if reciting a mantra. "If you'd like to come in, you'll have to remove the cap and the sunglasses." Shaq, the man who had defied gravity on the court, now found himself powerless before an absurd rule. He looked at the young security guard, disguising his disbelief beneath the impassive facade of his dark glasses. "Mate, I'm a customer. I've come a long way for lunch," Shaq said, his irritation beginning to bubble like poorly fermented beer. "Doesn't matter, mate. Rules apply to everyone," Kevin insisted, planted like a rock, his eyebrows arched like a warning. He was starting to feel a little intimidated by the man's height and build, but the determination of a British soldier prevented him from backing down. Shaq took a deep breath, a sound that made Kevin flinch for a second. He didn't want to cause a scene, but he also wouldn't lower himself to a nonsensical regulation. He removed his cap and sunglasses, revealing the face that had once inspired millions, a face that was synonymous with power and charisma. "Happy now?" Shaq asked, with a sarcastic smile that didn't reach his eyes. Kevin looked at him, unblinking, as if staring at a newly discovered statue. He had no idea who this giant was. He simply thought he was a stubborn customer, who thought he was above the law. "That's no way to speak to a member of staff," Kevin said, crossing his arms over his chest, like a knight raising his shield. "You're being disrespectful." "Disrespectful? Mate, this is my pub," Shaq exclaimed, his voice rising in volume, like a volcano about to erupt. Kevin chuckled, a dry and disdainful sound that made the closest customers turn to observe the scene. "You're not the owner of this place. The owner is Shaquille O'Neal, and he's far too busy to come here and argue with a security guard over a hat. Now, come in or move along." Shaq, the man who had faced the best centers in the world, was momentarily speechless. He couldn't believe what he was hearing, as if he were in a surreal nightmare. "Mate, I am Shaquille O'Neal," Shaq said, his voice now thundering like a lion's roar. Kevin rolled his eyes, as if dealing with a tantruming child. "Yeah, and I'm Prince William. Stop mucking about and either come in or move on." The queue of customers was now a captivated audience, whispering and pointing at the giant with the uncovered face. Some, recognizing Shaq, tried to contain their laughter, while others looked at the security guard, as if he were about to become the star of a viral video. But Kevin, with his British obstinacy, was so focused on his job that he didn't notice the chaos he was causing. Shaq, feeling the limit of his patience approaching, tried one more time, like a player seeking the final play of the game. "Mate, I'm the owner, I swear," he said, reaching out to show the security wristband that all staff members wore, the last trump card up his sleeve. Kevin grabbed Shaq's arm with unexpected force, as if arresting a jewel thief. "That's enough. I won't tolerate your attitude any further. You're causing a disturbance. If you don't calm down, I'll have to call the police." Shaq, the man who had dribbled past relentless defenders, now found himself immobilized by a pub security guard. He looked at the young man, a mixture of fury and disbelief in his eyes. "Are you seriously throwing me out of my own pub?" Shaq asked, his voice almost a whisper, as if he didn't believe his own words. "Yes, I am. You're being a nuisance. Now, leave before I have to use force," Kevin responded, with a stern look that didn't give an inch. Shaq, still stunned by the surreality of the situation, felt his patience drain away like sand in an hourglass. He knew he could easily handle the security guard, but he didn't want to create a public spectacle. He decided that the best option was to retreat and deal with the situation later, like a general who withdraws to plan a new attack. "All right, mate, I'm off," Shaq said, raising his hands in surrender, like a giant bowing before a dwarf. "But you'll regret this." Kevin, satisfied that he had controlled the situation, nodded with an air of triumph, like a knight who had won a battle. "Good. Now, go away." Shaq turned and began walking towards the street, his footsteps heavy like those of a wounded elephant. He was so furious he could barely speak, as if his throat were clogged with his own indignation. He grabbed his cell phone, with fingers that trembled slightly, and called his manager, Mark. "Mark, you won't believe what just happened," Shaq said, his voice as tense as a bowstring. "I've just been thrown out of my own pub." Mark, on the other end of the line, started laughing, a loud and incredulous sound that echoed in Shaq's ear like a mockery. "What? How did you manage that, Shaq? Who would dare throw you out?" Mark asked, as if he were listening to a very badly told joke. "A new security guard, a bloke named Kevin. He didn't recognize me and said I was disrespecting the dress code. He booted me out like I was some kind of delinquent," Shaq explained, his voice still full of anger, like a volcano about to erupt again. Mark stopped laughing immediately, noticing the serious tone in Shaq's voice. "Bloody hell, Shaq, this is a disaster. I'll sort this out right away. Don't you worry." Mark hung up the phone and called the head of security, David, a man who had seen it all in the security world, but who would never have imagined that one day he would deal with the situation of a giant being thrown out of his own pub. He explained the situation, with a voice that mixed urgency and disbelief, and asked for Kevin to be called in immediately. Meanwhile, Shaq sat in his SUV, his head in his hands, trying to calm the storm that raged within him. He couldn't believe he had been thrown out of his own establishment, like a king banished from his kingdom. He ran his hand over his face, as if trying to erase the shame and humiliation, and took a deep breath, trying to regain the composure that made him a leader. He knew he needed to handle the situation rationally, like a strategist planning each move. A few minutes later, Mark arrived in the parking lot, accompanied by David, who had a look as worried as a doctor who had just diagnosed a patient with a rare disease. They found Shaq sitting in his SUV, with a look that mixed fury and perplexity, like a caged lion who doesn't understand the reason for his imprisonment. "Shaq, I'm so sorry about all of this," said Mark, with a tone of genuine concern, like a friend trying to console a companion in trouble. "I can't believe this happened. We're going to sort this out right now." "Where is that security guard?" Shaq asked, his voice still loaded with anger, like thunder echoing after the storm. "He's inside waiting," replied David, with a tone of voice that conveyed the seriousness of the situation. "We've already explained what happened, and he's very nervous." Shaq took a deep breath, as if preparing to go into battle. He knew he needed to calm down, even if the fury still burned like fire. He didn't want to cause any more trouble, like a leader protecting his subjects. "All right, let's go in," said Shaq, with a voice that, despite the anger, still conveyed a sense of authority. They entered the pub, and the atmosphere had transformed into a stage where all eyes were fixed on Shaq's imposing figure. People were whispering, pointing, and filming with their cell phones, as if they were witnessing a historical event. Kevin was standing near the door, with a look of panic on his face, as if he were about to be judged for his sins. Mark and David approached him, like two lawyers preparing a case for court. "Kevin, do you know who this man is?" Mark asked, his tone as serious as that of a judge. Kevin looked at Shaq, who was standing next to Mark, as if he were facing a giant that had emerged from a fairy tale. "Yes, he's the bloke I threw out," Kevin replied, his voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. "Kevin, this is Shaquille O'Neal, the owner of this pub," said David, with a firm voice that left no room for doubt. Kevin's eyes widened, as if witnessing a miracle. He was speechless, as if reality had bent before him. He looked at Shaq, his face paling as if he had seen a ghost. He couldn't believe what he was hearing, as if he had been transported to a parallel universe. Shaq approached Kevin, with footsteps that echoed like drums. "You didn't recognize me, did you? You threw me out of my own pub." "That's not very professional," said Shaq, with a voice that, despite its stern tone, still conveyed a sense of fairness. Kevin tried to explain, like a defendant seeking mercy in court. "I'm so sorry, Mr. O'Neal. I didn't know who you were." "I was just following the rules," Kevin said, his voice almost inaudible, like the sound of a whisper. Shaq took a deep breath, as if trying to control the storm that still raged within him. "I understand that you were following the rules, but you need to learn to handle situations more intelligently. You can't just throw people out without knowing who they are," said Shaq, with a slightly calmer voice, as if he were teaching a lesson to an apprentice. "I know, sir. I'm sorry." "I'm really sorry," said Kevin, his eyes welling up, as if he were about to cry with shame. Shaq looked at the young security guard, and saw the fear in his eyes, the vulnerability that hid behind his rigidity. He realized that Kevin had not acted out of malice, only out of overzealousness, like a soldier who follows orders without questioning. "Look, Kevin, I understand that you're new to the job and that you were trying to do your best. I'm not going to fire you, but you need to learn from this," said Shaq with a gentler tone, as if he were extending his hand to a companion in need. "Thank you so much, Mr. O'Neal," said Kevin, with a sigh of relief, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "I promise I'll never make this mistake again." Shaq smiled, a smile that illuminated his face and made Kevin feel a little more relieved. He knew he had done the right thing, that justice was not just about punishment, but also about understanding and the opportunity to learn. He didn't want to destroy a young man's life because of a misunderstanding, like a king who protects his subjects. "Now, let's do this. You're going to serve me a meal of the best that this pub has to offer, and then we're going to chat about how to improve security," said Shaq, with a tone of voice that mixed authority and camaraderie, like a leader inviting his companions to a feast. Kevin broke into a huge smile, as if he had won the lottery. "Yes, sir. Absolutely." And so the day that began with Shaq being barred from his own pub ended with him giving a lesson in humility and professionalism to a young security guard, a story that spread like wildfire on the internet, generating laughter, comments, and a feeling of admiration for Shaq. He learned that sometimes you have to have patience and understanding, even with those who don't recognize you. And Kevin, in turn, learned that it is important to look beyond appearances and treat everyone with respect, regardless of who they are, that true security is not in blindly following rules, but in having empathy and wisdom. The story of Shaq being thrown out of his own pub became an urban legend, an anecdote that was told and retold in every corner of the internet, generating laughter and a feeling of admiration for his humility and sense of justice. But in the end, everyone agreed that the way Shaq handled the situation was an example of how a true leader should act, with wisdom, humility, and a generous heart. And as for Kevin, he never made the same mistake again. He became one of the most loyal and dedicated employees of the pub, always grateful for the second chance that Shaq had given him. And whenever he saw Shaq entering the pub, he would break into a smile and greet him with, "Hello, Mr. O'Neal. Welcome home, mate." A constant reminder that humility and respect are the true keys to success.